Have you ever stopped to wonder what your silence truly means to those around you? Not the occasional quiet moment, but the silence that settles in when words are needed most. We often think that saying nothing avoids conflict or saves time, but here's the truth: silence speaks volumes, and not always in the way we intend. In relationships, it can be devastating. Imagine this: someone you care about reaches out not in obvious words, but in subtle actions, body language, or even in their withdrawal. They're searching for connection, a sign that they matter. And you, whether out of fear, distraction, or misunderstanding, say nothing. What happens next? They're left to fill the void with their own assumptions, doubts, and fears. That silence you thought was neutral, it's killing them inside. Why does this happen? Why does silence, intended or not, create such profound damage in our relationships? Let's explore 6 reasons why your silence might be harming the people around you. Together, we'll uncover the impact of silence, and more importantly, how to break free from its grasp. The goal isn't to make you feel guilty, but to awaken a sense of urgency and empowerment. You hold the key to healing, connection, and transformation starting now. Before we dive in, think about this: what has your silence been saying lately? How might it be misunderstood by someone who depends on your voice? Stay with me. By the end of this, you'll have the tools to replace silence with clarity, connection, and compassion. Reason 1. It breeds insecurity. Silence is often seen as harmless. We tell ourselves that not saying anything can't possibly hurt anyone, that it's better to remain quiet than risk saying the wrong thing. But in relationships, silence is rarely neutral. Instead, it can create a void, a vacuum that insecurity rushes to fill. Over time, this insecurity takes root, sowing doubt and fear in even the strongest of connections. Imagine this: you send someone a heartfelt message, perhaps sharing your worries or expressing something vulnerable. You wait for a response, but none comes. Minutes turn into hours, and your mind starts racing. Did I say something wrong? Are they upset with me? Do they even care? The silence becomes deafening, not because it's loud, but because of the questions it leaves unanswered. This is how insecurity begins to grow. Insecurity thrives on ambiguity, and silence is its greatest ally. When someone doesn't respond or engage, the other person is left to interpret their silence. Human nature leans towards self-criticism, and in the absence of clarity, we often assume the worst. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe they don't value this relationship as much as I do. These thoughts are rarely true, but silence gives them space to fester. Consider how silence can shape even the smallest interactions. Perhaps you've had an argument with a partner, and instead of resolving it, you retreat into silence. To you, this might feel like a way to cool off or avoid saying something you'll regret, but to your partner, it may feel like abandonment. They might think, why won't they talk to me? Do they even care about how I feel? This misunderstanding can deepen the divide between you, making reconciliation even harder. Let's take a moment to examine why silence has such a powerful impact on our sense of security. At its core, insecurity stems from a fear of the unknown. When we don't understand someone's thoughts, feelings, or intentions, our minds fill the gaps with assumptions. Silence, by its nature, offers no information, leaving the other person to wrestle with their doubts. The longer the silence persists, the stronger these doubts become. But silence isn't always intentional. In fact, it's often the result of hesitation, distraction, or fear. Maybe you don't know what to say, or you worry that your words might make things worse. Maybe you're preoccupied with your own concerns and don't realize the impact your silence is having. Whatever the reason, it's important to recognize that intent doesn't negate effect. Even unintentional silence can create insecurity, leaving the other person feeling unsure about their place in your life. Now, let's shift the focus to you. How often do you stay silent because you're unsure of what to say, or because you think it's easier than engaging? It's a natural reaction, but one that carries unintended consequences. Each moment of silence sends a message, whether you mean for it to or not. And that message is often interpreted through the lens of the other person's insecurities. For example, think about a friend who's reached out to you during a tough time. They've opened up about their struggles, seeking comfort or advice, but instead of responding, you remain silent. Perhaps you're unsure of how to help or feel overwhelmed by your own issues. While your silence might come from a place of uncertainty, your friend might perceive it as indifference. Over time, this miscommunication can erode the trust between you, leaving both of you feeling isolated. Breaking this cycle starts with awareness. Begin by asking yourself, what is my silence communicating? If the answer is unclear, consider how the other person might interpret it. Are they likely to feel supported, understood, or valued? Or are they more likely to feel ignored, dismissed, or forgotten? This simple reflection can help you recognize the impact of your silence and make more intentional choices in your interactions. It's also important to remember that silence doesn't have to mean avoidance. Sometimes you might need time to process your thoughts or emotions before responding, and that's okay. The key is to communicate your intentions. A simple statement like, "I need a moment to think about this, but I want to talk about it soon," can make a world of difference. It provides clarity and reassurance, preventing insecurity from taking hold. Let's take a closer look at how insecurity caused by silence can manifest in relationships. Over time, repeated instances of unaddressed silence can lead to a sense of instability. The other person might start to question not just individual interactions, but the foundation of the relationship itself. Do they really care about me? Can I rely on them when it matters most? These doubts can snowball, creating a rift that becomes harder to bridge. Addressing this requires a commitment to proactive communication. Instead of waiting for someone to misinterpret your silence, make an effort to clarify your thoughts and feelings. This doesn't mean you have to have all the answers or be emotionally available at all times. It simply means being honest about where you're at. For example, if you're feeling overwhelmed and unable to engage, you might say, "I'm struggling right now, but I want to be here for you. Can we talk later when I'm in a better headspace?" This kind of openness builds trust and prevents insecurity from festering. Of course, breaking the habit of silence isn't always easy. It requires self-awareness, vulnerability, and a willingness to take risks. You might worry about saying the wrong thing or fear that your words won't be enough. But remember, connection isn't about perfection. It's about presence. Even imperfect words carry more weight than silence, because they show that you're willing to try. As we wrap up this section, let's reflect on the power of your voice. Every interaction is an opportunity to either strengthen or weaken the bonds you share with others. By choosing to speak, even when it feels uncomfortable, you can create a sense of security that silence can never provide. Your words don't have to be profound, they just have to be sincere. What would happen if, the next time you felt the urge to stay silent, you chose to speak instead? How might that choice transform your relationships? And how might it change the way you see yourself as someone capable of creating connection, fostering trust, and building a foundation of security for those around you? The answers lie not in silence, but in the courage to break it. Reason 2. It erodes trust over time. Trust is the foundation of every meaningful relationship. It's the invisible thread that ties two people together, creating a sense of safety, loyalty, and reliability. But here's the thing, trust isn't built in a single moment. It's cultivated over time through consistent actions, open communication, and shared experiences. And just as it takes time to build, trust can slowly crumble one silent moment at a time. Silence has a unique power. In the right context, it can comfort, soothe, or create space for reflection. But when it becomes the default in moments that demand clarity, it erodes the trust others place in us. Think about it. When someone is met with silence instead of an answer, what are they supposed to believe? That you're hiding something, that you don't care, that they're not worth your time. Each unanswered question, each unspoken word, chips away at the foundation of trust. Let's pause for a moment. Picture a bridge. Each plank represents a moment of connection in your relationship. When you communicate openly, whether it's through words, gestures, or actions, you're reinforcing that bridge, ensuring it's strong enough to withstand any storm. But when you remain silent, it's like removing a plank. At first, the bridge might still stand, but over time, too many planks go missing, and the entire structure collapses. Have you ever had someone break your trust through silence? Maybe they didn't show up for you when you needed them most. Maybe they avoided answering a question, leaving you to fill in the blanks with your own fears. How did it feel? Did you grow closer to them, or did it create a distance you couldn't quite bridge? Now, turn the mirror on yourself. How might your silence be eroding someone's trust in you? It could be a friend who's confided in you, hoping for reassurance but receiving nothing in return. It could be a partner who senses something is wrong but hears only silence when they ask what's on your mind. Or it could be a colleague, family member, or even a stranger who feels dismissed because you didn't take the time to respond. The truth is, silence often feels easier in the moment. It lets you avoid uncomfortable conversations or difficult truths. But what's easier now can cost you later. Trust isn't something you can buy back once it's broken. And the most dangerous thing about silence is that its damage is often invisible until it's too late. So what's the alternative? How do you ensure your silence doesn't erode trust? The answer is simple but not always easy. Be present, even when it's uncomfortable. Acknowledge the moments that matter, even if you don't have all the answers. You don't need perfect words, you just need to show up authentically. For example, instead of ignoring a tough question, you could say, "I don't know how to answer that right now, but I care about this and want to find the right way to respond." That single sentence does more to build trust than hours of silence ever could. Here's a question to reflect on. How often do you choose silence over connection? And more importantly, why? Are you afraid of being vulnerable, worried about saying the wrong thing, or simply unsure of how to start? Whatever the reason, recognize that choosing silence is still a choice, and it's one that can have long-term consequences. Let's talk about vulnerability for a moment. Many of us equate vulnerability with weakness, but the truth is, it's the opposite. It takes immense strength to be honest, especially when it feels risky, but that honesty is what builds trust. It tells the other person, "You're important enough for me to try, even if I don't get it right." Silence, on the other hand, says the opposite, "You're not worth the effort." Is that the message you want to send? Here's an exercise for you. Think of a recent situation where you chose silence over communication. Maybe it was a small moment, like ignoring a text because you didn't know how to respond, or a bigger one, like avoiding a conversation about something that was bothering you. Now, imagine how the other person might have interpreted your silence. What could you have said instead to build trust rather than let it erode? It's not too late to repair the damage. Trust can be rebuilt, but it requires action. Start small. If you've been silent, acknowledge it. Say, "I realize I didn't respond when you needed me, and I want to make it right." It may feel awkward at first, but that discomfort is a sign that you're growing. And growth is what leads to stronger, healthier relationships. If this resonates with you, let me know in the comments. Hit like and type number 1 if you're ready to commit to breaking the silence and rebuilding trust in your relationships. Don't forget to subscribe for more insights like this, because every step toward connection starts with understanding. And I'm here to guide you every step of the way. Before we move on, think about this. What kind of bridge are you building with the people in your life? Is it strong and resilient, or are there gaps where silence has taken its toll? Stay with me, because in the next part, we'll explore how silence blocks emotional intimacy and why breaking that pattern can transform your relationships forever. Reason 3, it blocks emotional intimacy. Emotional intimacy is the heart of every deep and meaningful connection. It's the ability to share your inner world, your thoughts, feelings, fears, and dreams with someone else and feel safe doing so. It's also about receiving that same level of vulnerability from the other person. Without emotional intimacy, relationships become shallow, transactional, or distant. And one of the biggest barriers to this kind of connection, silence. Silence, when it replaces communication, creates a wall between people. Instead of fostering closeness, it keeps others at arm's length. Imagine a relationship like a garden. For it to flourish, it needs regular care, water, sunlight, and nourishment. Communication is the nourishment that keeps emotional intimacy alive. Silence, on the other hand, is the equivalent of withholding water. At first, the garden might survive, but over time, the plants begin to wither. Have you ever felt disconnected from someone, even though you were physically present with them? Maybe it was a partner who stopped sharing their thoughts or a friend who only gave surface-level answers. That kind of distance isn't created overnight. It's the result of repeated moments where opportunities for connection were lost to silence. Over time, the relationship becomes like a house with empty rooms intact on the outside but hollow within. Why does silence block emotional intimacy? It's simple. Intimacy requires vulnerability, and vulnerability requires communication. When you choose silence over sharing, you withhold a part of yourself. You send the message, intentionally or not, that the other person doesn't need to know what you're feeling or thinking. This might feel like self-protection. After all, being vulnerable can be scary, but the cost of that protection is distance. Think about this. How often do you hold back from sharing something important because you're afraid of how it will be received? Maybe you worry that the other person won't understand or that they'll judge you. Or maybe you've convinced yourself that your feelings aren't worth sharing. Whatever the reason, every time you stay silent, you miss an opportunity to deepen your connection. Now flip the perspective. How do you feel when someone else withholds their thoughts or emotions from you? Perhaps it feels like they don't trust you enough to open up. Or maybe you start to question whether they care about the relationship as much as you do. Silence isn't just the absence of words, it's the absence of connection. And that absence can feel like rejection, even if it's unintentional. The truth is, silence often masks deeper fears. Maybe you're afraid of conflict and believe that silence will keep the peace. Maybe you've been hurt in the past and have learned to equate vulnerability with pain. Or maybe you simply don't know how to put your feelings into words. These fears are valid, but they're also obstacles to the very intimacy you crave. The question is, are you willing to confront those fears for the sake of your relationships? Let's explore what emotional intimacy looks like in action. It's not about grand gestures or dramatic confessions. It's about the small, everyday moments where you choose connection over silence. It's sharing how your day really went, not just saying, "It was fine." It's admitting when you're upset instead of pretending everything is okay. It's asking meaningful questions and being genuinely curious about the other person's experiences. Here's a practical example. Imagine your partner comes home after a tough day. You sense that something is wrong, but they say, "I'm fine." If you accept that silence at face value, the opportunity for intimacy is lost. But if you gently probe, "You seem upset. Do you want to talk about it?" You create space for them to open up. Even if they're not ready to share immediately, your willingness to engage sends a powerful message. "I'm here for you." Now consider the reverse. What happens when you're the one withholding your feelings? Maybe you're afraid of burdening the other person, so you stay silent. But in doing so, you deny them the opportunity to support you. Emotional intimacy is a two-way street. When you share your inner world, you invite the other person into a deeper connection. And when they do the same, you strengthen the bond between you. Of course, building emotional intimacy isn't always easy. It requires courage, patience, and practice. If you're not used to opening up, it can feel uncomfortable or even unnatural at first. But like any skill, it gets easier with time. Start small. Share one thing you've been thinking or feeling, even if it's as simple as, "I've been stressed about work lately." Notice how the other person responds. Most likely they'll feel closer to you, not because of the content of what you shared, but because of the act of sharing itself. Another way to foster emotional intimacy is to actively listen when others share. Silence can be harmful when it's passive or avoidant, but it can also be powerful when it's intentional. When someone opens up to you, give them your full attention. Don't rush to respond or offer solutions. Simply hold space for their words. This kind of listening creates a sense of safety and encourages further sharing, deepening the connection between you. As you reflect on this, ask yourself, what opportunities for emotional intimacy have I missed because I chose silence? What fears or habits are holding me back from opening up? And what small steps can I take today to start bridging the gap? Breaking the pattern of silence isn't about being perfect. It's about being present. It's about showing up, even when it's uncomfortable, and choosing connection over fear. The rewards are worth it. Emotional intimacy doesn't just enrich your relationships, it transforms them. It turns acquaintances into friends, friends into family, and partners into soulmates. It's what gives relationships their depth, meaning, and resilience. So, what will you choose? Will you continue to let silence create distance, or will you take the first step toward intimacy? The choice is yours. And remember, it's never too late to start. Every moment is an opportunity to connect, to share, and to grow closer to the people who matter most. Take that opportunity. You might be surprised by the transformation it brings. Let's carry this momentum forward. In the next section, we'll explore how silence doesn't just block intimacy, it can amplify the pain someone is already feeling. Together, we'll uncover how breaking that silence can become a powerful act of compassion and healing. Reason 4. It amplifies their pain. Pain is a universal part of the human experience. We've all felt it: emotional hurt, sadness, disappointment, or fear. During these moments, we instinctively seek comfort, validation, and support from the people we care about. But when that support is met with silence, the pain doesn't just linger, it grows. Silence amplifies pain, turning a manageable wound into a festering one. And the worst part, this amplification is often unintentional, making it even harder to recognize and address. Let's start with a simple but powerful question. Have you ever been hurting and felt ignored? Maybe you were going through something difficult, a breakup, a job loss, or even a bad day, and the person you reached out to stayed silent. They might not have known what to say, or perhaps they didn't even notice your distress. Regardless of their intent, how did that silence make you feel? Did it help you heal, or did it deepen the ache? Silence can feel like indifference. When someone doesn't acknowledge your pain, it's easy to assume they don't care. Imagine standing in the rain, soaking wet, while someone watches from inside a warm house. Their inaction might not mean they want you to suffer, but it can feel that way. Now think about how often your own silence might leave someone standing in the rain, longing for acknowledgement that never comes. Pain is heavy, but it becomes unbearable when it's carried alone. Silence forces people to shoulder their burdens without the relief that comes from sharing them. It tells them, your feelings don't matter enough for me to engage. This might not be the message you intend to send, but it's the one they receive. And once that perception takes root, it's hard to undo. Why does silence amplify pain so powerfully? Part of the answer lies in how our minds work. When someone is hurting, they're already in a vulnerable state. Their thoughts tend to spiral, magnifying every slight or perceived rejection. Silence leaves room for interpretation, and in moments of pain, those interpretations are rarely kind. If they cared, they would say something the person might think, or worse, maybe I'm not worth comforting. Consider this: how often do you stay silent because you feel unsure of what to say? It's a common reaction. Many of us fear saying the wrong thing or making the situation worse, so we choose inaction instead. But silence isn't neutral, it's a response. And more often than not, it's the wrong one. Even imperfect words are better than no words at all. A simple "I'm here for you" can make all the difference. Now let's flip the perspective. Imagine someone you care about is in pain. How do you want to show up for them? Do you want them to feel seen, heard, and valued? Or do you want them to wonder if their feelings matter to you? The choice seems obvious, but in the moment, silence can feel like the easier path. It's less risky, less awkward, but it's also less human. Breaking the silence doesn't require grand gestures. In fact, the simplest acts of acknowledgement often carry the most weight. A text that says, "I noticed you've been quiet lately, are you okay?" can be a lifeline. Sitting with someone in their pain, even without offering solutions, shows them they're not alone. It's not about fixing their problems, it's about reminding them they don't have to face them in isolation. I think about the times when someone has done this for you. Maybe it was a friend who listened without judgment, a family member who offered a hug, or even a stranger who smiled at you on a hard day. Those moments stick with us because they cut through the fog of loneliness and bring us back to connection. What if you could be that person for someone else? What if your words or presence could ease their pain, even just a little? Of course, being present for someone else's pain requires emotional energy. It's not always easy, especially if you're dealing with your own challenges. But consider this, silence doesn't just amplify their pain, it also creates guilt and regret for you later. When you reflect on missed opportunities to support someone, it can leave you feeling as though you failed them. Choosing connection, even in small ways, is as much a gift to yourself as it is to the other person. Here's an exercise to try. Think of someone in your life who might be hurting right now. It could be a friend, a family member, or even a coworker. Reach out to them today. You don't have to have all the answers or say the perfect thing. A simple "I've been thinking about you. How are you doing?" is enough. Watch how that small act can shift the dynamic and create space for healing. Now let's talk about what happens when you're the one in pain. Do you find yourself withdrawing, hoping someone will notice your silence and come to your aid? This is a common reaction, but it's also a risky one. Expecting others to read your mind sets them up for failure and leaves you feeling even more isolated when they don't respond as you hoped. Instead, consider breaking your own silence. Reach out and say, "I'm struggling and could use some support." Vulnerability invites connection. At this point, you might be wondering, what if the other person doesn't respond the way I want? What if they remain silent, even after I reach out? This is a valid fear, and it speaks to the importance of surrounding yourself with people who value communication and connection. If someone consistently meets your pain with silence, it might be worth reevaluating the role they play in your life. But let's not underestimate the power of modeling the behavior you want to see. When you choose to break the silence, you set an example for others. You show them that it's okay to speak up, to care, to engage. Your actions can inspire them to do the same, creating a ripple effect that strengthens not just one relationship but many. If this resonates with you, let me know by hitting like and commenting number 1 below. And if you're ready to dive deeper into topics like this, don't forget to subscribe. By joining this community, you're taking an active step toward creating stronger, more compassionate relationships, not just for yourself, but for everyone around you. In the next section, we'll explore another powerful truth: how silence can create resentment in relationships. Stay tuned, because understanding this dynamic might just transform the way you communicate forever. Reason 5. It creates resentment. Resentment is like a slow-acting poison in relationships. It starts small, perhaps as a flicker of annoyance or frustration, but left unchecked, it grows. Over time, it hardens into bitterness, creating a chasm that becomes harder to bridge with each passing day. And one of the most common triggers for resentment: silence. When someone feels ignored, dismissed, or invalidated by another's silence, it plants a seed of resentment. They might not express it right away, especially if they're the type to avoid conflict, but the feelings linger. They replay the silent moments in their mind, interpreting them in ways that often amplify their pain. Was your silence intentional? Were you punishing them, or worse, indifferent to their needs? Without clarity, their imagination fills the void, and rarely with kindness. Let's take a moment to examine this dynamic more closely. Imagine you're in a relationship where every time you try to express a concern or share a feeling, you're met with silence. At first, you might give the other person the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they're tired, you tell yourself. Maybe they don't know how to respond. But as the silence becomes a pattern, your patience starts to wear thin. You begin to feel unheard, undervalued, and even disrespected. Over time, these feelings harden into resentment. Why is resentment so toxic? Because it doesn't just sit passively in the background. It shapes how we interact with the other person, even if we're not fully aware of it. Resentment creates emotional distance, making it harder to feel empathy or affection. It clouds our judgment, leading us to interpret even neutral actions in a negative light. And perhaps most dangerously, it can erupt in ways that damage the relationship. Harsh words, passive-aggressive behavior, or outright withdrawal. Now flip the perspective. How might your silence be creating resentment in someone else? It's easy to dismiss their frustration as an overreaction or to justify your silence as unintentional. But the truth is, impact matters more than intent. If your silence consistently leaves someone feeling ignored or devalued, the seeds of resentment will inevitably take root. And once they do, repairing the relationship becomes much more difficult. So what can you do to prevent resentment from building? The first step is to recognize when your silence might be sending the wrong message. Are there moments where you avoid responding because it feels uncomfortable or inconvenient? Do you stay quiet because you don't have the perfect thing to say, or because you assume the other person will understand your intentions without needing words? These are all common behaviors, but they're also potential triggers for resentment. Next, take responsibility for your role in the dynamic. This doesn't mean blaming yourself for the other person's feelings, but it does mean acknowledging how your actions or lack thereof might be contributing to the problem. For example, if someone says, "I feel like you're ignoring me," resist the urge to defend yourself with, "That's not what I meant." Instead, try responding with empathy, "I'm sorry you feel that way. Can we talk about what's going on?" This simple shift in approach can diffuse tension and pave the way for understanding. Another powerful tool for preventing resentment is proactive communication. Don't wait for the other person to bring up an issue. Take the initiative to check in. A question as simple as, "How are we doing?" can open the door to meaningful dialogue. It shows the other person that you care about their feelings and are willing to invest in the relationship. And it gives you the opportunity to address any brewing resentment before it has a chance to fester. But what if resentment has already taken hold? Is it possible to repair a relationship that's been damaged by silence? The answer is yes, but it requires effort and honesty from both parties. The first step is to acknowledge the resentment openly. This can be uncomfortable, but it's necessary. For example, you might say, "I feel like there's been some tension between us, and I want to understand what's going on." This invites the other person to share their perspective without placing blame. Once the resentment is out in the open, the next step is to listen without defensiveness. This can be challenging, especially if their words feel like an attack. But remember, their resentment is a response to their experience, not a judgment of your character. By listening with an open mind, you demonstrate that you value their feelings and are committed to making things right. After listening, take action to rebuild trust and connection. This might involve apologizing for past silence, making a conscious effort to communicate more openly, or simply spending more quality time together. The key is to show, through your actions, that you're invested in the relationship and willing to do the work to repair it. Of course, not all resentment can be resolved. In some cases, the damage caused by silence might be too great to overcome, especially if it's been a long-standing pattern. If this happens, it's important to approach the situation with grace and self-awareness. Reflect on what you've learned and commit to breaking the cycle of silence in your other relationships. Here's a question to consider. How might your relationships change if you replaced silence with intentional communication? How would it feel to know that you've done everything in your power to prevent resentment from taking hold? These are the kinds of questions that can guide you toward more fulfilling and harmonious connections. Breaking the pattern of silence isn't just about avoiding resentment, it's about creating relationships that thrive on trust, respect, and mutual understanding. It's about choosing connection over avoidance, even when it feels uncomfortable. And it's about recognizing that every interaction, no matter how small, is an opportunity to strengthen the bond you share with others. Take a moment to reflect on this. Who in your life might be carrying resentment because of your silence? What steps can you take today to begin repairing that relationship? And how can you ensure that silence doesn't become a barrier to connection in the future? In the next section, we'll explore the final reason why silence can be so damaging, the unintended messages it sends. Together, we'll uncover how to replace harmful silence with meaningful communication that builds trust, connection, and understanding. Reason 6. It sends the wrong message. Silence, like words, is a form of communication. Whether intentional or not, your silence always says something. The problem is, the message silence sends isn't always the one you intend. It can be misinterpreted, misunderstood, and magnified in ways that create unnecessary pain. Without clarity, silence can seem cold, indifferent, or even punitive, leaving the other person to assume the worst. Over time, these misinterpretations can damage trust, connection, and the overall health of the relationship. Let's unpack why this happens. When words are absent, the brain fills in the gaps. It's a natural response. Humans are meaning makers. We're wired to interpret the behavior of others to understand how they feel about us. When silence replaces words, it creates a vacuum, and that vacuum gets filled with assumptions, fears, and often insecurities. For example, if you don't respond to someone's vulnerable text, they might conclude you're upset with them, uninterested, or worse, dismissive of their feelings. Even if your silence is unintentional, perhaps you're busy or unsure how to respond, it still sends a message. And that message is rarely positive. I think about the last time someone was silent when you needed them to speak. Maybe it was during an argument when you craved acknowledgement but got nothing. Or perhaps it was during a moment of vulnerability when you needed reassurance and were met with a wall of quiet. How did that silence make you feel? Did it bring you closer to the other person, or did it create distance? Chances are it left you feeling isolated, invalidated, or even hurt. Now turn the mirror on yourself. How often might your silence be sending the wrong message to someone you care about? It could be a partner, a friend, or even a coworker. Maybe you've stayed silent in moments when words were needed, whether out of fear, hesitation, or simply because you didn't realize the impact of your quiet. Whatever the reason, it's important to recognize that silence, even when unintentional, has consequences. Silence can often be mistaken for disinterest or apathy. For example, imagine a scenario where a friend opens up about something they're struggling with, and instead of responding, you remain silent. They might think, why don't they care? Or did I make them uncomfortable? Even if your silence comes from a place of not knowing what to say, the message received is often one of indifference. Over time, these moments can add up, leading the other person to feel undervalued or unimportant. There's also the danger of silence being interpreted as punishment. In some cases, when someone is met with silence during conflict or disagreement, they may perceive it as a form of emotional withdrawal or control. This is often referred to as the silent treatment, and it's one of the most damaging dynamics in any relationship. Even if your intent isn't to punish, the perception alone can erode trust and connection. So, how do you avoid sending the wrong message with your silence? The answer lies in replacing silence with intentional communication. This doesn't mean you always have to have the perfect words or an immediate response. It simply means acknowledging the other person and giving them clarity about where you stand. For example, if someone shares something vulnerable and you're unsure how to respond, you can say, "Thank you for sharing that. I need a moment to think about what you've said." This small act of acknowledgement prevents misinterpretation and reinforces that you care. Another powerful way to counteract the unintended messages of silence is to practice proactive communication. I don't wait for someone to misinterpret your silence. Get ahead of it by expressing your thoughts and feelings openly. For example, if you know you're the type to retreat into silence during conflict, you can say, "I tend to get quiet when I'm processing my emotions, but it doesn't mean I don't care. I just need a little time to think before I respond." This level of self-awareness and honesty can transform the way others perceive your silence. Now, let's consider the other side of the coin when you're on the receiving end of silence. How do you navigate those moments without jumping to conclusions or letting your imagination run wild? The key is to approach the situation with curiosity rather than assumption. Instead of thinking they don't care, try asking, "Is everything okay? You've been quiet." This opens the door for dialogue and reduces the likelihood of miscommunication. It's also important to remember that silence isn't always about you. Sometimes the other person's quiet has more to do with their own internal struggles than it does with your relationship. By offering them the benefit of the doubt and creating space for them to explain, you demonstrate empathy and understanding. This approach can diffuse tension and foster deeper connection. One of the most challenging aspects of breaking the pattern of silence is overcoming the fear of vulnerability. Many of us stay silent because we're afraid of saying the wrong thing or exposing our true feelings. But here's the truth: vulnerability is a strength, not a weakness. It's what allows us to connect authentically with others. By choosing to speak, even when it feels uncomfortable, you send a powerful message: I care enough to try. If you're wondering where to start, here's a simple exercise. Think of someone in your life who might be misinterpreting your silence. Maybe it's a friend you've lost touch with, a family member you've been avoiding, or a partner who's been asking for more communication. Reach out to them today. You don't have to have all the answers, just let them know you're thinking of them and that you value your connection. A text, a call, or even a handwritten note can go a long way in clarifying your intentions and rebuilding trust. At the same time, take a moment to reflect on the silent messages you've received from others. Are there relationships in your life where you felt hurt or confused by someone's quiet? Consider reaching out to them with curiosity and compassion. Ask questions, express your feelings, and create an opportunity for understanding. You might be surprised by what you uncover. Finally, let's not underestimate the power of small, consistent actions. Silence often feels easier in the moment, but over time it creates distance and misunderstanding. By choosing to engage, even in small ways, you can strengthen your relationships and ensure that your intentions are understood. Whether it's a simple acknowledgement, a word of reassurance, or an honest expression of your thoughts, these acts of communication can transform the way others perceive you and how you perceive yourself. If this message resonates with you, let me know by hitting like and commenting #1 below. And if you're ready to take your relationships to the next level, make sure to subscribe for more insights like this. Together, we're building a community of thoughtful, compassionate communicators who value connection over silence. In our next journey together, we'll dive deeper into practical strategies for replacing silence with meaningful dialogue. Remember, every moment is an opportunity to choose connection, and every word has the power to heal. Thank you for being here, and I'll see you in the next discussion. Silence is often misunderstood. In the moments when it seems like the easiest choice, when words fail us, when emotions feel overwhelming, or when the fear of conflict looms, it can feel like a safe harbor. But as we've explored, silence is rarely neutral. It carries meaning, often unintended, and its impact can be profound. It breeds insecurity, erodes trust, blocks emotional intimacy, amplifies pain, creates resentment, and sends the wrong message. Silence, if left unchecked, has the power to slowly unravel the very relationships we hold dear. But here's the good news. Silence doesn't have to be the end of the story. In fact, by recognizing its impact, you've already taken the first step toward breaking the cycle. Every moment of silence is an opportunity to choose a different path, to replace the void with acknowledgement, connection, and understanding. The question is, are you ready to make that choice? Let's pause for a moment to reflect. Think about the relationships in your life. Are there people who might be suffering because of your silence? Perhaps a friend who's been waiting for your support, a partner who's craving deeper communication, or a family member who feels distant. What would happen if you reached out to them today? How might a single conversation, however imperfect, transform the way they feel and the way you feel too? Breaking the silence doesn't mean you have to have all the answers. It doesn't mean you need the perfect words or the ideal timing. It simply means showing up, being present, and letting the other person know they matter. A simple "I've been thinking about you" or "How are you really doing?" can open the door to a deeper connection. And once that door is open, the possibilities are endless. Of course, breaking the cycle of silence isn't just about others, it's also about yourself. How often do you stay quiet about your own needs, feelings, or struggles? How many times have you hoped someone would notice your silence and fill the gap, only to be left disappointed? It's time to recognize that your voice matters too. By speaking up, you not only invite others into your world, but also empower yourself to take ownership of your experiences. Let's consider what's at stake. Silence doesn't just affect the present moment, it shapes the future of your relationships. The longer silence persists, the harder it becomes to bridge the gap it creates. But the opposite is also true. Every word, every act of communication strengthens the bonds that connect us. The choice to speak, even when it feels uncomfortable or vulnerable, is an act of courage and love. Now, let's imagine the ripple effect of breaking the silence. When you choose connection over quiet, you inspire others to do the same. Your actions create a model for what healthy, open communication looks like. You show the people in your life that it's okay to be vulnerable, to care, and to engage. And as this mindset spreads, it transforms not just your relationships, but your entire community. So what's next? How will you take what you've learned and put it into action? Start small. Think of one person you've been silent with, someone who might need your voice. Reach out to them today, even if it's just to say, "I'm here." Notice how it feels to replace silence with connection. Then, build on that momentum. Make communication a habit, not a reaction. The more you practice, the more natural it will become. As we wrap up, I want to leave you with this: silence can feel powerful, but it's words that heal, connect, and transform. Your voice has the potential to create change, not just in your relationships, but in your own sense of self. Use it wisely. Use it often. If this message resonates with you, let me know by hitting like and commenting #1 below. And don't forget to subscribe for more insights and conversations like this. Together, we're building a community that values connection, compassion, and growth. Thank you for being here and for choosing to break the silence. Here's to stronger, deeper, and more fulfilling relationships. See you in the next discussion.